Welcome to Let's Talk, where Spokane Talks hosts seek out and discuss the latest on a variety of interesting topics to Spokane and North Idaho. Here's today's host, Mike Fitzsimmons.
Hi, everybody, and welcome. I'm Mike Fitzsimmons, and in this edition of Let's Talk, we're going to chat politics. We're going to talk politics with Rick Whitehead, who is running for Sheriff of Kootenai County. Rick, welcome to the... you'll know him as Richard on all of the official stuff, but this is Rick. Rick, welcome, and it's nice to meet you today and to chat with you. Just before we went on the air, we were talking about the fact that the Coeur d'Alene area and the North Panhandle is just growing leaps and bounds, and this is creating all kinds of issues, of course. It will. And you get to deal with those if you're elected, plus the after effects of coronavirus and economic issues. And what a time to be jumping in the pool, my man, huh?
It's wild times, that's for sure. Thanks for having me.
You bet. So let's talk about that growth, because that's going to be one of the biggest things you're going to have to deal with should you be elected to be the chief law enforcement officer of the county. This population is growing in leaps and bounds, and obviously the revenue base doesn't grow quite as quickly, and the number of officers per thousand, you get into ratio issues and all that sort of thing. What about that?
There's a lot of balls in the air right now with that, with the explosive growth. And I moved here in 2011, and it's changed dramatically since we've been here. And now you have, with the growth, you have the current state of the stock market, which has everybody on edge. The COVID-19 and all those different things, the tax dollars not keeping up. And in fact, Idaho tried to do a tax freeze this year, which that did not pass, but it just shows you the status of where everything is. So it's a whole lot of having to do everything you can do with what you got or less.
So this is going to take somebody who's been at the wheel a time or two before, because the reality of it is that if there's a rookie stepping into this situation, not going to know what to look for in a lot of ways. And you've got a long history in this.
In my career, the last 25 years in the Austin, Texas area at Travis County, during my time there, we saw a population change of 100%. So I have lived and worked through the explosive growth and know the drawbacks of not addressing it and the advantages of staying ahead of it.
But also, as a small businessman, you have actually trained other law enforcement officers how to deal with issues of this nature. So you've seen it from both sides of the coin.
True. In the 90s, I started a training company based off of a training program I wrote for my agency, which grew legs outside the agency, which led to me starting my training company. And then over the years, as my career advanced, the training company advanced. So, yeah, I train leaders all across the nation on how to treat their people, and the golden rule is my basic rule of life: treat people the way you want to be treated. And
so let me ask you to explain how all that is going to come to play and what the benefit is to the voter of Kootenai County.
Well, if the members of the Sheriff's Department feel appreciated and are being treated in the organization the way they would want to be treated in like circumstances, especially in our trying times, with the current state of the economy and things like that, there could possibility of not being any pay raises. I can even foresee, depending on how the stock market goes and home assessments and things go, we could be going backwards for a short period of time. They're talking 30% unemployment maybe when this is done. So, but if the employee, regardless of the circumstances, feels appreciated for what they do, that just translates to the people they encounter in their day-to-day job as to how they're going to treat them. If they're mad at work or mad because of how work's treating them, then that's just going to reflect. But if they feel appreciated regardless of the circumstances, I think it works that way too.
You happen to be in a border county with a different state, and even if none of this had happened at all, there's always been some issues associated with that, because the rate of pay for law enforcement officers in Washington tends to be significantly higher than the rate of pay for those in Idaho.
Right.
And now you have the aggravated reality of the possibility of significant employee numbers shifts in law enforcement around the entire northwestern region of the nation as a whole.
Right.
But you'll always have the reality that until or unless parity is achieved, which is unlikely, that there may be greener grass someplace, and some of your senior officers, your deputies who are particularly skilled and have got a lot of depth of experience in the community might find a better opportunity, and that's going to be a problem. How do you manage to keep the talent in Coeur d'Alene and in North Idaho?
That is and definitely can be a problem, and it's another one of those things that my career has experience in. And in the 90s at Travis County, we were in exactly the same boat that Kootenai County finds itself in today, with attrition and the pay imbalances between agencies and explosive growth. And I was an integral part of fixing that at Travis County at the time. And through building relationships with the commissioners on the Board of Commissioners at Travis County, as well as going to all the different citizens groups in the county and establishing a relationship with them so they understood the Sheriff's Department's plight and our share of the tax dollars for providing public safety, I was able to get us in the ballpark with our competition, which was Austin PD there. And what I have seen over the years, and great leadership teachers say, is people don't quit jobs, they quit bosses. And that's what I found through my career, is they don't quit jobs, they quit bosses.
And also the paycheck is number 5 in the list of reasons why folks will leave an institution.
Right. It's normally not number one until it gets
number
so
one.
disparate
Right.
that it becomes number one. But normally it's that relationship and how they feel at work, whether they feel valued or not, or if they're part of something bigger than themselves. And that is the challenge, is to incorporate that in the Sheriff's Department, that every employee knows that they are part of something bigger that's countywide, and they have a countywide effect in their relationship, and they are valued. And that minimizes the value of the dollar. You still got to try to stay in the same ballpark, but you don't ever have to be number one, and you don't have to have the parity, as long as I feel valued at work.
And of course, that comes from the sheriff himself.
It starts
the
at the top
bottom line
and goes
is
down.
that comes from you, that if it's going to work, it's going to work because you've designed a system that will function in that way, and if it's not going to work, it's going to be because there's a flaw in your thinking.
Right.
Basically, right?
It starts with me, and then from the people I put in place below me all the way down.
And also now we have some additional things. As we mentioned, the reality is that we're dealing with we want a quick snapback, obviously, and the economy to recover quickly. And it's possible to some extent that it will, but let's be realistic. It'll come back eventually fairly well. But it isn't going to be where it left when the tragedy began, right? And that's going to take some time, and that time is not going to be instant. It's going to be a matter of years. And because that's going to be the case, and the growth is going to continue and what have you, there's going to be a financial stress for local government, period. So what about the relationships that you alluded to moments ago relative to the county commissioners and other folks in leadership in the county? Both in the municipalities as well as at county government, you're going to have to know who those folks are and how to work with them very, very closely.
Right, and I've already started those relationships, and now it's going to become even more critical in having those budget discussions as our economy draws back. Government tends to grow outside its requirements and fund some feel-good things and arts things that are not a mandatory part of government. And when times get trying, like we're coming into, it's going to be time to evaluate what we have to do versus what we want to do.
And obviously you're going to have a series of proposals for county government particularly that are sound and that are not just competitive but are easily recognizable as superior to the other directions they might go.
Right, and be able to analyze the budget and be able to squeeze every penny out of all the different areas of that to be able to properly fund a public safety operation. The current staffing is not where it should be for the current growth, and I don't see in the next year or so, with the drawback we have today, the foresight of that, to be able to do anything about that in the next year or so. It's all about being able to do.
And that would have been the
less.
case notwithstanding all of this that has intervened in the last few weeks.
Right.
The coronavirus issue and all that sort of thing. That's been a problem. The ratio of officers per 1,000 in the population, and the unique geography of Kootenai County, which is somewhat urban in some locations, but largely rural,
Right.
with great distances between potential crime scenes, potential calls for help, and where the sheriff's patrols are.
It is not uncommon for somebody to dial 911, and it's 45 minutes before they see a deputy.
And that's going at breakneck speed to
Right,
get there.
and it's a hazard to the deputy and
Yeah.
and people around to get there. But when somebody dials 911, they have a natural assumption of, shortly after hanging up the phone, they expect to hear sirens, and that's not reality.
And that's an education issue,
Right.
which has always been a problem for law enforcement, particularly in rural communities, but it has never been one resolved or solved in Kootenai County. How are you going to go about that differently than the way it's been done in the past?
Education, you hit the nail on the head with education. I think that has been lacking, meeting the different neighborhood groups or citizen groups throughout the county, like the Harrison or Metamont area, Spirit Lake, Bayview, meeting with those groups on a regular basis and letting them know the status of the sheriff's office and working with them to find that balance of, you move to a rural part of the county for your reasons, but understand that also makes it more difficult on the public safety side of it, and just the constant education is the key. And that's how I solved the problem in Texas in the 90s with the pay and their attrition, was that education piece, getting everybody to understand how the budgets play together and the need of the sheriff's office in relation to the need of the citizen.
But at some point, you're going to have more deputies in the field.
Yes.
Or otherwise, you're going to be losing ground because the ratios are going to stretch away from you in a negative way, not a positive one.
And the wider those ratios get, the crime has a natural
Sure.
inclination to move up. So you
Bad
have
guys
to
know
keep
how to
those
take
ratios.
advantage of those situations.
That's right.
They truly do.
And they don't pay attention to the borders.
If elected, you're going to be the chief law enforcement officer for Kootenai County, and a sheriff under our system, under our constitutional system, is a rather unique law enforcement officer. Not like a police chief who's generally appointed. This is an individual who is accountable strictly to the voters who selected him or her, who wear that badge, and they have. Of course, a long tradition with respect to sometimes being out of touch with, or sometimes just being on the opposite side of the coin in certain sorts of issues. North Idaho is a conservative area.
It is.
It's a conservative area when it comes to Second Amendment. Very strong support of the Second Amendment. Folks carry weapons there, and they don't apologize for it. Folks have a strong sense of their own personal privacy and to direct their lives as they see fit. And sheriffs have been smart enough up until now to allow that to be the case. But you also have political pressures largely coming from without.
Right.
That are trying somehow or other to curtail that on the theory that there's a better way to do that. And you're going to find yourself right in the middle of that controversy.
That's one of the most common questions I get while I've been campaigning is, what about the guns? And early on, I had a more long, drawn-out answer about the guns. It's always, it's your right as a citizen to have a gun.
Sure.
But I don't know whether it's just out of repetition or just shortcutting the answer. My answer now is, anyone coming after your guns, they'll have to get them out of my cold, dead hands before they get to your cold, dead hands. And much like the credit card commercial, never leave home without it. Never leave home without it.
So you're prepared then to stand up against any local governments,
Any government overreach.
the state legislature, the federal government?
Any
And who
government
knows, it
overreach.
could come to that.
It very well could. And yes, I'm prepared to interpose myself between any overreach of the government and the citizen.
But
to
there's
defend the
also
Constitution.
there's also an opportunity to be able to broker understandings and to protect interests without necessarily in conflict.
Right.
And of course, we would look to you to do that if you're going to be sheriff, and we'd prefer obviously a little diplomacy versus a hardline position, because some sheriffs have discovered that while they were right, they were obnoxious, and the only thing they remembered was they were obnoxious.
Right. No, absolutely. Talking's always way better than having to get physical and actually do that interposition. But push come to shove, if the talking doesn't work and the explanations don't work, and you draw the line, then we'll stand on the line.
You got to be a visible person.
Yep.
I mean, it's a 24/7 job. You're never off duty.
Right.
It's a 24/7 job, and you talk about education that obviously is going to tax your time dramatically, but you also have the obligation to be a law enforcement officer, not a PR guy all the time. And so how do you balance that?
Having good people in place that are like-minded to myself to help with that day-to-day operation. The guy that's top on my list to be my undersheriff or chief deputy is the term I grew up with, was chief deputy. Right. Is that person has to be like-minded with me, so when I'm out of the office for whatever reason, I know those decisions are going to be made as if I was making them. And somebody that's not afraid to challenge me. I don't always have all the right answers. I think I do till somebody gives me another angle, but none of us always have the right answers. But have somebody that's not afraid to say, are you sure you want to do it that way? That can be my second in command or third in command, that's not afraid to say, can we talk about this first? Because I think you're wrong. And I'm wide open to have those discussions. I'd look to put people in place that are smarter than me to help me look good and carry the agency forward.
And of course, or do you? I assume have assessed the talent that's already available at the sheriff's department to some degree. Are you anticipating bringing in that cabinet you're talking about, that leadership, or is it there already?
I'm anticipating bringing in the number 2 guy because there's been same old for so long. And one of the reasons I'm in the race is some retired deputies and some current deputies asked me to be in the race because with the growth that we've already talked about, they realize that the same old is not going to work anymore, that they need an outside perspective, somebody that's seen different agencies and done different things to bring those ideas and ways of doing things in and move away from the same old.
So there's going to be a somewhat of a shift in the paradigm there to a degree. You think that's necessary?
Correct.
Let's talk about campaigning. You tossed your hat in the ring where the conventional wisdom was you're going to go door to door, shake a lot of hands, have a lot of coffee clatches, a whole bunch of meetings, and then along comes this virus, and the word is, sorry, Rick, but you're not going to be able to do any of that kind of stuff. So what kind of a challenge does that present?
Well, I've been at this for a long time. I entered the race in March of 18, way before, we're coming up on May finally
right.
For the election. So I've been campaigning while other elections have been going on, which has been kind of confusing for some people. But after I felt impressed to get in the race, and then I had those other law enforcement people pushing me to get in the race, I had coffee with the current sheriff, and that's when I found out he wasn't going to run again. And that's when the light went on for me that this is where my career and my experience has brought me to. I need to do this. And I told him that I'm going to run. And he said, well, nobody knows who you are. I'm like, well, I can fix that. And I started running in March of 18 to get that name recognition and meet as many people as I can. So I've been at it for 2 years, and I've established tons of relationships and I've met tons of people. So with this virus kind of locking everything down, is not hurting me as much as maybe some of the other candidates that haven't had the advantage of being on the trail as long as I have. The other side of that is now we're going to use technology for our side. I have a virtual meet and greet scheduled for this Thursday night, and some other YouTube channels that are out there have invited me on their show, and so we're using the social media and YouTube side of it.
So the technology is something that you're going to, and by the way, that is one of the ways in which the education process that you speak of, even after you've been elected, that you're going to have to continue that. I mean,
right.
That's just the reality of it. That's where we live now.
And doing virtual meetings, people can attend from their living room and their kitchen table or wherever, and they don't have to get dressed up and go anywhere.
What are some of the chief concerns you have that we've not discussed yet, but chief concerns you have in terms of the county you will be serving and how it may affect enforcement of the law in the near future? What are some of the things you look at and say, I don't know necessarily how we're going to deal with that?
Well, currently with the COVID-19 stuff that's going on, like right now we're sitting in the state of Washington, which has pretty much locked down everything. Yeah. Idaho hasn't got there yet. But Our Constitution says life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Mm-hmm.
These lockdowns are in violation of that liberty. As sheriff, I would not enforce a lockdown. As part of your liberty, and as a business owner, that's another part I don't understand, is how government can tell a business you're now closed. Businesses should be able to operate, and as a potential customer of that business, it's my choice to decide whether I feel that's a risk to me or not going to that restaurant. And if the restaurant chooses to close on its own because of the advice they're getting, that's fine. But mandatorily having to close, I think that's a government overreach. And as a sheriff, I would not enforce a closure. It's an individual's right to decide if they feel safe going there, then they can go there. If the business feels safe in opening, then they can stay open.
So these are individual choices. Yet on the other hand, the theory is that keeping the contact at a minimum is a greater public safety consideration because of the way in which this virus is able to spread so rapidly. And so, how do you balance then the individual rights of the citizen with the collective rights, especially in the area of public safety, which, by the way, has a history of superseding the individual rights in this country, traditionally speaking. How do you balance that?
Never before in our history have we had such a reaction and a lockdown against civil liberties. The balance is that individual choice of, I've been advised to minimize my distance with people and minimize my social contact. My business has said I can work from home. The restaurants and grocery stores and things are still open because they still need to operate, and
they're considered essential.
They have a right to make a living.
Yeah.
It's my choice to decide how much interaction I want to have and how much I will subject myself to the risk of that social interaction.
Yes, but medically speaking, I'm not advocating this position, but medically speaking, the reality of it is that those who decide it's not a great risk to them may very well create a great risk to others. What do you do with that? They also have an equal right.
They do.
Your rights end where my rights begin, so to speak, right?
It's a balance we got to find, but I don't think government has the right to arbitrarily put businesses out of business for that sake.
Well, that's an issue I think in North Idaho will fly easier than it will elsewhere. But
I agree.
But the truth is that's a controversial point, and I appreciate that you make that, because fundamental rights and the personal rights that we have are not supposed to be subjugated to anything other than a violation of somebody else's rights. Now, just the public safety threat, if there is one, and there perhaps is one, but that has to be something that you take into consideration with respect to your own choices, right?
Right.
That's what you're saying.
And nowadays, with all the delivery options and things there are, even most of the grocery stores now, you can call in your order and not even have to get out of your car when you get there. You pop your trunk, they come and put it in your trunk, and you drive away, which also minimizes the contract.
I presume that you see this somewhat as a dangerous precedent also, because, I mean, we knew from the experience of 9/11 that we passed that Patriot Act in the Senate 100 to nothing in the United States Senate. There wasn't even any debate. Now, some years afterwards, we look back over our shoulder and go, oh gosh, we probably should have spent a little more time with that, because we've discovered some rather significant challenges to the constitutional rights, and we've tied up various issues in the courts for a long, long time. It's been an expensive, even a painful experience in the aftermath, and you foresee the same possibilities, I presume.
I do, and government as a whole has a horrible practice of, once it decides it can do something, not letting go of it. And the 9/11 stuff is a perfect example.
Yeah, and sometimes folks seem to forget that it was the states that signed the Constitution to create the federal government, not the other way around.
Right, exactly. The states gave birth to the federal government, not the other way around. The federal government is not our parent, and we're not the kids.
Yeah, and that's important to note, but a lot of folks don't seem to, especially the media. Speaking of which, let's talk about the press. The ideas that you're talking about are the kind of ideas that the press loves to distort, throw around, and criticize. How are you going to deal with that? Because guess what? They're going to be after you.
They've already been after me. And I have learned, we had this conversation on the car over here, I have learned to not answer their questions by phone anymore or in person. It's come to give me your questions in writing and I'll answer them in writing, and that way there's a less likelihood of being misquoted. The last time I got that phone call and said, well, this is how I feel, that's not what was reflected in the paper.
And that happens virtually regularly, yes. And when we talk about the paper, you're talking about the North Idaho papers or the papers in general?
The Coeur d'Alene Press is specifically
Press.
the last one
Right.
I was misquoted in.
Yeah. Have you ever been quoted exactly right?
Only in writing.
Only in writing.
That's the best way to do it.
Well, sometimes they leave certain things out, don't they?
That's true.
Have you noticed that too?
But then I have my document that makes it easier to
I've been
count.
in the media for 47 years, and I've never been quoted accurately in all that period of time, and I know what they're doing and why.
Right.
So that's been an issue. So the media is going to be something that you're going to have to do something about as well, and understanding where they are and what the temperature is and all that sort of thing. Part of that education process is to be able to figure out how to work successfully with the media, or to be able to get around media bias, to be able to communicate directly with your constituents.
And that technology piece we talked about a little while ago, I think, helps level the playing field on that media bias. With instant access to social media and YouTube and having those other platforms, definitely minimizes the drawback of the other one.
What are your future constituents telling you about their concerns when you get together with them and discuss these sorts of matters? What are you hearing?
The first question seems to always have to do with guns.
Yeah.
And I really do not see the government coming after the guns.
Yeah, I don't expect that to be the case either.
But it's a hot button for people.
Oh, yeah.
However, with this COVID-19 thing, it's increased the heat on that button again.
Gun sales have gone through the roof in the last 4 weeks.
In that fear, right?
Yes, there's a fear, clearly.
After that, it's tax dollars. You mentioned earlier, I have a business experience. I've had, a training company for 25 years. The gentleman that's number one on my list to be my second in command has 25 years business experience. He also has 30 plus years law enforcement experience. So between us, we bring over 50 years of law enforcement. We bring over 80 years of law enforcement, 50 years of business experience, and 50 years of training experience. So we have the combination of all the bases covered on how to properly run a public safety agency, how to train them properly and economically, and make the best use of those tax dollars. And that's the number two component, I guess, after guns, is making best use of the tax dollars. And we both have that. Even though it's government, this is a business, and it is up to us to spend those tax dollars that we're entrusted with as wise as we can.
Do I presume also, though, that you recognize a proactive obligation to advise those who will allocate funds in the legislatures of the local communities as well as the state, and so that you're going to be needing to set out some propositions to them that you think are necessary for their consideration? I
do, and to do some long-term planning with them and help them see the future of, while you're giving us this year, this is what we're going to need next year and the year after, based on the growth projections and how far we are behind now and where we need to go, to help map that out so we can work collectively on how do we fund this going into the future, and what were those non-government things we've been paying for that we can't pay for anymore because public safety comes first.
And so that dialogue is an ongoing, it never ends.
Right.
It's virtually never ends.
Right. Well, there's a budget process going on that started in January for a budget that's going to be implemented this October.
Right. For the following fiscal year.
You barely get one budget approved and you're working on the next one.
Exactly. Always. If there were the ability to put into just a sentence or two the primary thing you want to achieve as the sheriff of Kootenai County, what would that be?
I want the sheriff's office to be looked at, every employee in the sheriff's office, but the most visible part would be the deputies, as ambassadors to the county. To, no matter what your problem is, public safety related or any other related, that you feel comfortable and confident to walking up to an employee or a deputy and bringing your issue. Back when we were kids, the police felt like they were, part of our family, part of the neighborhood, and you felt comfortable to approach them. And over the past decades, that has kind of widened, and it's almost depending on where you're at, us versus them.
Yeah.
And I despise that us versus them. I want our agency to be ambassadors to the county and people to feel confident and that we're friendly and easy to approach. There's a time when people need to go to jail, and there's a time when people need to get a ticket for something, but that's not all the time. And that should not be the focus of a deputy looking around trying to figure out what they can write you a ticket for or what in trouble.
Sure.
It's an ambassadorship.
But all this functions under a virtually a nationwide suspicion and animosity toward law enforcement in general. You've got this repetitive theme going on out there that might not necessarily be replicated in North Idaho, but it definitely is a national theme because an awful lot of folks don't like people who wear a badge.
And that has been fed through the media and other sources over the past decade, and it's part of that educational component again to let people see the deputies as part of their community, as part of their neighborhood, as people, and not something to be feared. Or, when you see, a car behind you in the rearview mirror, it's not you feel good that they're back there because they got your back, not that they're looking to do something with you.
You see fewer of those anyway now these days.
That's true.
I mean, you truly do. Well, one last question, and this is one that's often important to people, but it tends to become less prioritized with respect to law enforcement because there are bigger fish to fry. But what about traffic? What about traffic enforcement? I mean, every day, I live in Coeur d'Alene, travel to Spokane to do my work and come back every single day in Idaho as well as in Washington. I see people doing dangerous and puzzling things in their vehicles, shall I say. And there never seems to be anybody there to put the lights on them, pull them over, and straighten them out.
Back to those ratios and those numbers again, having enough manpower on the street to be able to address those issues for the public safety benefit.
But is it an either or? Can it be a both?
Well, it should be a both, but when your resources are so thin and they're tied up on a call, a domestic violence call or a large burglary or something like that, and they're tied up at a scene, then you can't get to both because you don't have the resources to do it. A perfect example, a couple of months ago, I was actually spending time in the car with a deputy. We were in just south of Rathdrum, big snowstorm, and we had to respond almost to Harrison for a traffic collision. And luckily, it only took us one vehicle to be able to go handle that collision. It didn't take multiple resources because at that particular, and it was an evening shift, which is typically the busiest time of a shift for any law enforcement agency is the evening hours.
Right.
There was only 4 deputies covering the whole county. So we're already behind the curve on those ratios. And with tight budget dollars, it's going to be imperative to squeeze every dime we can. And I have the experience, I'm the only candidate in the race that has the experience of dealing with compounding growth, I've written $85 million budgets and worked multi-million-dollar budgets, and the training component. I'm the only one that has the experience in all those areas of success, a proven track record of success in those areas. And experience does count. Somebody might say, well, a CEO is a CEO. In the corporate world, that might be, that a leader of an agency or a leader of a business can be a leader of any business. But in the public safety world, that is not at all the reality. In the public safety world, you have to have done what you expect people to do. I can't order somebody to go through a door with an armed person on the other side if I've never done that or am willing to do that. It's a different world in public safety than it is the corporate world. You have to have done what you're asking your people to do.
One last question. Assuming that you were able to come to my doorstep and have a conversation like this with me as a constituent, when you left, what would be the thing you wanted me to think about or remember the most?
That I was honest and straightforward and answered all your questions, and you might not have liked all the answers, but you got them answered honestly.
All right. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
And he is Rick Whitehead, and he wants your vote when you vote in May for Sheriff of Kootenai County. I'm Mike Fitzsimmons. That's the session of Let's Talk. See you again next time.
Let's Talk is produced in Spokane, Washington by Spokane Talks Media, which is solely responsible for its content. Ask a question, recommend a guest, and hear this program again online anytime at SpokaneTalksMedia.com. We wish you a great day